Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Standing Committee for Tuesday, October 10th. Sorry for the late start. We were having some technical difficulties. I'd like to welcome everyone to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. And I'd like a motion for adoption of the agenda. Moved by Doug, seconded by Ted. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We have committee minutes to approve. Moved by Ted, seconded by Doug. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to our business. Today's business is really all about the upcoming budget discussions. So we've got 3 different conversations this morning, and I will turn it over to Cindy.
Thank you, Chair Elliott. Linda Glenday, CAO here at the District of Squamish. We've got 3 items on the agenda to discuss with you today. The first is going to be public engagement on the budget process, and Christina Moore will be helping us with that. After we talk about the schedule with Anushka, and then the last item will be council priority items. And so I've got a list of the strategic priority items that are in process, on deck, and we hope to have a fulsome conversation with council about prioritization of items as staff go into finalizing the budget model for council. Where we're at currently in the schedule is all the budget managers have input their data, finance, or their requests, and their plans. Finance is now inputting the data into the model. So at this time, we don't have tax effect of different projects. So in terms of scoping of those council priorities, we haven't put a number to them because they're less meaningful until you see them against the rest of the budget. So at this point, it's more of a conversation around your priorities, and then we'll continue to put the model together and bring it back to council in December for more workshops. So I will pass it over to Anushka, who will talk about the schedule.
Welcome, Anushka.
Well, thank you. I'll just put, I've distributed the schedule to everybody, and I'll just put a copy on the screen. As Linda mentioned, right now I'm just we're importing everything in the budget model to see all the tax implications. We'll review on October 24th the SLRD budget submission, and then in November. And please keep in mind, this is the time that we worked out and we got allocated. We might need more time. We feel that it's not a lot of time to review everything. So on November 14th, we're going to have a council workshop where we're going to review the utilities budget. And then that's going to bring us to December 5th for the first reading of the bylaw. And then the following week on Monday, December 11th, we're going to have another council workshop, and then we'll chat about the general fund. And then the next day, we'll maybe continue on the general fund, depending on what we're able to cover or not. And probably complete everything on the Tuesday. Then we go to the next week, and we'll have one extra workshop. It looks like a lot of workshop, but I'm sure you've all been through this, and you know we'll need all the time we've got allocated to complete and hopefully finish the review of all the budget items. The next day on the Tuesday, hopefully we'll be able to adopt the utility fee bylaw, and then we come back in the new year, and we slot in some dates in January. Those might change or not, but at the moment, hopefully we'll be able to have a good idea of the budget and all the changes at the beginning of January, so we can complete everything by the end of February with an early adoption this year. Fingers crossed. My first year.
Can I ask, Anushka, the Monday times for the workshops?
Yeah.
Is staff proposing a time? for those? Morning, afternoon?
Afternoon is, I can't make the mornings.
Okay.
Where I work in the mornings. Anytime afternoon is me.
So what time would you like
Anytime after morning is fine.
this afternoon, like from like 1 till 5 or?
1:30 till,
Okay.
So Councillor Chappelle would prefer a start time of 1, but other people.
Doesn't matter to me, but we just did have this discussion with respect to a committee of the whole meeting, and the preference, I gather, was evening, late afternoon, evening.
After 5:30, I think, was the consensus of that.
Sometimes our brains are a little tired at that time to start thinking about budget, but we can consider that as well. So, but I'm good anytime.
Not my brain, it's not tired.
It's just
No,
waking
no.
up.
The reason I'm asking is because some of these are 6 hours long, so we can't start that in the evening. That is too late. But if people have enough advance notice, and I think staff would probably prefer some afternoons rather than evenings. And so if we start in after lunch, at 1 o'clock, is that all right?
For me,
Okay.
And I recognize that 3 of our council members aren't here today, but I think that's a fair compromise, is focusing on the afternoons.
So keep in mind that we already think that we don't have enough time slot in scheduled for the budget review. So some of them, if you're all okay staying late, we might stay when we're moving like towards the end. We might stay longer.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Doug?
But just looking at the schedule, I mean, from January 9th, which is a workshop for budget changes, and January 31st, public information meeting, so there's a couple of weeks in there. And then there's a big jump until March 6th. So if we didn't solve everything by January 9th, I mean, is it feasible to have 1 or 2 meetings between the 9th and the 31st, for example?
Christine, so she would.
So we do often end up doing that. You just have to leave enough time for Anushka to actually process your decisions into a public forward format. And that takes us a little while. Ideally, we have done that in the past. Generally, it does require overtime on staff's part to make that happen, to turn it around and get it back out to public dissemination. But yes, generally, we end up cheating in. We'd like to not plan to cheat in there if we can help it, but it has happened in the past for sure. After we go to public, we really like to just sew it up after that. So obviously we want to be able to have some opportunity for the public to weigh in, and often there are some changes that outfall from that. So again, we leave a little bit of time into March, but again, the goal is to be delivered and finished in February. And bearing in mind, to council, we did have a discussion in the summer about the resources for the department, trying to deal with the TTP project at the same time. We'll be trying to roll out some major projects during that period as well, so we will only have so much resourcing in that period. So the more efficient we can be would be really helpful to us, obviously.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that's why I prefer to take those workshops, and if we have to sort of work through dinner and go longer, because what I've found in the past is that the further we get away from our original conversations, then council members forget why we approved something or what's changed. So the further away we get from our general fund conversation, then we have to go back around, and I find we have to be reminded about why we made that decision. So I think the more we can compress it, it helps the TTP project, but also helps in our own decision making, because we're not having to try and remember again why we approved something in November when now we're in February.
And I think it's a really valid point, and I think the hardest thing about budget is things are changing every day. So the longer you string out your budget process, the more opportunity there is for that new thing and that new thing. And realistically, that's the joy of budgeting, right? There is always a new thing. There's always something we're trying to deal with. So the more you can compress that and get it sorted and done, the more opportunity staff have to just get on with the work projects. And there will always be emerging issues. But
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
thanks, and a lot of the things that we've discussed weren't approved. They were approved in principle or referred to the budget. So a lot of those big conversations that happen, there's a lot of I've heard over this year quite a few things that council wants to take a crack at as far as funding or discussing or adding to the budget. And if I think of all those things, it's impossible. So we will have to have some priority conversations on making sure that our strategic plans align and that we're not just promising the world and not able to budget for it. I also want to really make sure that we're cognizant of our long-term goals. We have not put a lot of money towards saving for long-term projects. That concerns me a lot, and that may cut off some of the shorter-term fanciful, I will call them fanciful, I'm sure they're not fanciful to some people, but things like water parks and all the other things. You know, when we look at strategy like Brennan Park, the things that the community has had in mind for a long time that need renewal, we haven't really added a lot of funds for long-term savings. And if we have any desire to actually look at facilities planning, and we also haven't had the facilities updated as well. So I think it's to keep in, we have to be cognizant of those long-term strategic plans and funding those plans, not just talking about them, but actually putting resources to them. Otherwise, they'll never happen.
So you're talking specifically about big capital projects.
Capital projects, smaller projects, all projects, and just anything that's a bigger ask has to be saved and funded for, or borrowed for, or how we're going to fund. I just think that how we're funding those, a lot of our individual projects that we're lobbying for, as opposed to bigger projects like bigger capital projects. And we have to make sure that the long-term planning is there for those projects in the budget.
Any further comments on the schedule? All right, thanks. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 2, which is the participatory budgeting and engagement content. And so our conversation today is really about input, providing Christina with some feedback on if she's on the right track, and not really, I don't think, any major decisions about amounts or that sort of thing, but certainly just trying to get the look and feel of it so that they can begin the engagement process. Over to you.
Good morning, Chair Elliott and Council. I'm Christina Moore, Communications Manager for the district. So today I'm going to take you through some of our ideas and plans for the public engagement aspect of the 2018 budget. I've just got a few slides to take you through. Just we'll highlight our objectives and then 4 main strategies that we have put together in terms of making information available, highlighting some themes. We want to spend quite a bit of time on points 3 and 4 there. We have some survey questions to share with you to start a discussion around some questions for the public, and then introduce you to an option for a participatory budgeting tool. So I think we all are well aware of this. We've been working on public engagement for a number of years around budget. We feel we do a little bit better every year. Our goal is to gather resident input, citizen input to assist in council's decision making, really learn what the priorities are that the community cares about, undertake education. Municipal budgeting is an exceptionally complicated process, and every year we do try to educate on what goes into the budget and make it interesting for people. And then also really highlight those trade-offs that are spoken about when we have to weigh one project against another and so many competing priorities. So our first strategy is really just to make sure that our budget materials are readily accessible. They have always been accessible on our website. And last year we introduced display boards that were well received at municipal buildings. I think our goal every year is to really try to break that budget down and make it more, make those spreadsheets more useful, and we're working on a tool to do that so that the community can get online and drill into the big chunks of the budget and drill down through the general government fund, through the transportation fund, and just to understand what is comprised of the budget. So this is really about education. It's about making sure that budget materials are accessible. And we had council's input earlier in September to say that let's get those display boards out at the beginning of the process, recognizing that it is proposed, but helping the community to understand that the budget process is underway. Here are the materials to review. One thing we'd like to add this year to that information sharing is to group some of our initiatives, capital projects, service level increases around themes. When you look at the spreadsheets, they can be overwhelming to anyone other than our finance team.
You're overwhelming us too, you know.
So we felt that it would be helpful for the community to highlight certain groups of budget items under topic areas that have high public interest. We hear a lot from the community about, what is the district doing to renew and to maintain our infrastructure. Council has put a lot of effort and funding towards active transportation projects. As well, policy work has been a big goal of this council over the last few years. So we'd like to take our big budget spreadsheets and group some of the projects under themes so that we can kind of raise those themes up a little bit and highlight them under certain subsections of high public interest. So we're certainly keen to get council's input on what those themes might be. We've proposed a few here, and certainly open to others. Potential others would be recreation and youth, public safety, development services, things like that. To accompany that, we would also like to work on, we also plan to write and publish some feature stories to put some narrative to those high public interest groups. So in particular, infrastructure renewal keeps coming up as an idea. We believe that there's a lot of opportunity to tell some of the stories of the work that has been going on over the last several years, and the commitment that council has made to the funding of infrastructure renewal, the master plans that we have in place that's informing our work, and really try to take an opportunity to reassure and to highlight to the community the important work that's being done in that area. So those are two ways that we'd like to do that. The mayor's video last year that highlighted major projects was well received, and another way for the community to kind of drill into the budget. She toured the Tantalus Fire Hall, looked at the seismic upgrades. She was at the ice arena looking at the new ice surfacer, and out on the corridor trail at Rose Park talking about active transportation upgrades. So we'll do something similar. We propose to do something similar again. Our third strategy, so in the September meeting of council of this group, we heard feedback that council would like to see some survey out in the community to get a sense of how the district is doing on a range of different topics. Take a bit of a temperature check, if you will, on a range of different topics. We have included a handout today of some possible questions titled "Squamish, Are We on Track?" The idea is that we could ask a broad range of questions, broad questions that help draw out feedback, as well as pinpoint some of the gaps. It would be a fairly easy survey as proposed that asks people to either to slide a sliding scale between strongly agree to strongly disagree. There's a slight formatting issue on that paper that you're looking at. The word disagree appears under that neutral don't know category. It should be under strongly at the end there. So moving the sliding scale, do you agree or disagree, or strongly agree, strongly disagree with this particular statement? And then if you don't, asking the community to add some comments. What do you feel is missing? Where are the gaps? If not, what are the problem areas? And drilling into some specifics that will hopefully help people be accountable to their responses and give us some meaningful feedback that we can understand where the gaps are. So maybe I'll just leave you to take a look through the questions for a couple of minutes if you wish, and then we can discuss.
Well, thanks. I think the list is backwards. We should start off with infrastructure and go to students to school. Just because it's the more expensive ones in the beginning. And I never hear anyone complain about safe routes to school, and I hear a lot of people complain about infrastructure. It kind of just feels like we're putting that at the bottom instead of the top.
So one thing to consider, Ted, is that the things that people might be most interested in responding to are the things around recreation facilities and safe routes to school. And if we ask them questions about infrastructure right near the top, they might tune out versus if we get them started on the things, then we'll get to infrastructure.
Well, I'm not a marketing person, but I know that big ticket items are back here.
They are. But they're also things that our citizens don't often think about.
I can want a dialogue on all this stuff you're doing and look at the roads. So, I mean, I'm fine either way, I just, in my opinion, it's.
Councillor Schmidt.
Thanks, I don't mind the list, I would agree with Councillor Pryor as well. I don't see anything on economic development or economy at all in the list.
Through your chair, so we did struggle with a number of topics that aren't listed on the list. What we tried to balance was length of survey was a primary consideration. We do feel 17 questions is long already. Ideally, it would be 10, for example. Those last couple of questions, what do you feel are the most pressing issues facing the district in the coming year? And do you have any additional feedback to share on a topic not covered here? Those questions are designed to draw out any information that people may have. However, certainly looking for council's feedback on what other topics may push some of these off the list, but we prefer not to add.
We've got 5 questions on movement through the community. Combine them into one. Do I feel safe getting around my community? And then a question to add feedback. You don't need walk, ride, safe routes to school. I think having a safe route, my child feels safe, I feel safe. Separating that out into multiple different questions may be too much.
Okay.
I think that people generally need to feel safe getting around the community and whatever mode that they choose, and then they can add maybe more cycling routes, then that allows them to open up the question, and then that wipes out 4 questions that you have an option to add something else. I think the businesses generally feel left out of budget questions, and I would say businesses in general don't get a lot of attention in our council, so I would really like to see an economic development question asked in this survey.
It's a good point, because we have an active transportation plan that did a lot of engagement. We also did safe routes to school for every single one of our elementary schools. So we do have a good sense of where our problem spots are. And so by maybe paring those down to fewer questions, just building on what Councillor Chappelle said, it might be useful near the beginning of the survey to have like to put all the topics, like arts and culture isn't here, economic development's not here, and to sort of say, you know, if you were ranking the importance of these budget areas, infrastructure, active transportation, you know, how would you rank them? So maybe a ranking question right near the beginning, and so then it stimulates people's ideas around all the possible ways we spend tax dollars. But then we don't have to ask a question around all of them, but we can see how.
Well, I was going to say, there's nothing here in social services, and then thinking about that a little bit more, that's primarily not a municipal responsibility. It's a provincial responsibility, so I'm not sure you want to kind of open the door to that. So, but you might have some statement as a preamble that this just concerns municipal functions. So things like health and schools and things like that people sometimes mistakenly associate with us would not necessarily be included in this and kept out of this, just to kind of explain where we're coming from. These are the things that the municipality spends its money on. And so apart from that, I'm okay with it. I agree with the comments that it could perhaps be just a little bit shorter and we don't have to talk about cycling 5 times or something like that, but apart from that, no, I'm fine with it.
Thank you, Chair. One thing about this survey that we are hoping to do, and this came out of finance in terms of their idea, I can't take credit for it, is to use the same survey year over year because that will allow us to benchmark. And so in terms of what questions council wants to ask with that lens on it, would be good. So safe routes to school, if we've already addressed it, is it something we want to keep asking year over year?
Well, I think to
Yeah.
Councillor Chappelle's point, if we just, do you feel safe moving about your community, walking, cycling, then we don't refer to a specific program, and then it has longevity continuity. Because the active transportation plan will always be there sitting behind us. So, does that help?
Great feedback, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and there is, I feel safe in my community, question number 6. And when I looked at that, before that discussion started, I was thinking that's fire and police.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to also talk about just moving around so you don't get run over by a car or something like that, maybe there are 2 questions there.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I think we can make do a better job of separating those 2 out because that number 6 question was intended to be about crime and policing and fire. So I think through some language we can keep those 2 themes separate.
So, to Doug's question, Councillor Race's question on social services. The funding of social services is provincial, but the housing of social services is, the facilities for social services is municipal. So providing space, some of it is, exactly. So I'm just wondering if there's some question in there about are there adequate facilities for, because at UBCM this year, I was informed multiple times that we had the highest homeless rate this year. We had the largest increase in housing issues across British Columbia. That should be something that's top of mind, and making sure that our programs are adequately funded in that way. Is that, I'm wondering if there's some way to educate the public on that initiative. I'm not sure if a survey is the best way, but maybe in the signboards and the other things is to really make the public aware, because people complain to me that, what are we doing about schools? Because we don't have enough schools for the future. What are we doing about the growth in population? How are we managing our services? And if we don't have the facilities to do that, the province has nothing to fund. So I think that's in our budget somewhere in the education, making sure the public understands what our responsibility is and that we are adequately meeting our responsibility with them.
My only other question, is question 10, the district's various master plans ensure that the community's infrastructure is well maintained, and I don't think our community is very familiar with all our master plans, and I'm wondering if there's a more general way to ask that question in terms of, you know, is the district making infrastructure maintenance and replacement a priority or a big enough priority? So I wonder, and then we could sort of list water, sewer, roads, drainage, and just to give people some tips, because I think if we ask about master plans, people won't know what we're talking about, but if we ask about pipes and drainage and roads, people will. Diking, I don't know if diking's any one of those.
Could we link to the plan for the question?
I just don't think people are gonna read it.
I
agree. Ted?
I mean, that's a good news story,
Mhm.
all those things. And, you know, a lot of these questions are a little bit abstract to the normal citizen reading them. It's, you know, but I was thinking about the grants that we get. Is the community happy with the $4 million worth of grants we got? I do agree that, I mean, some of these questions, I could just see Facebook eating them up.
Which ones in particular?
Well, just maybe misunderstanding them a little bit.
So is there a way we can clarify them? Which ones do you have in mind?
Well, the roads kept in general care, and that's a good thing. The library meets the needs. You know, you're asking, you know, it's just questions that have open-ended so that people want more. Does it meet the needs? You know, not really. District incentives and programs. That's another one. Most people don't know much about those. Good service from the district staff. I mean, when I read that, I think about the building department, and I listen to all the developers out there. And you know, I certainly get an earful about building permit times, things like that. So maybe that could be broken down into that more, I don't know.
Maybe I'll have Christina respond, because, I mean, in a sense, we do want to provoke comments.
Yeah.
Christina?
Yeah, I think Councillor Pryor's comments are very fair, especially in terms of what we see on some of the social media threads. I think the positive thing about a survey like this is that it's anonymous, and it reaches. The idea is that it's you know it's available on your mobile phone. It's available on your iPad. I think our hope is that we will get a broader group of people providing feedback with a broader range of opinions and responses. And you know, if when it is an anonymous survey, some of these questions absolutely might be posted to a social media thread and discussed. But in other ways, you know, reaching a broader group and having people complete the survey on their own in their own time will get a much more varied response, and maybe a truer response of the overall community rather than just a vocal group. So I think that's something to consider. And if we do see some themes, I think the sense from council in our last meeting was that you'd like to understand have a bit of a temperature check on some of these things. If we don't see that balance and we see one extreme across the board, then that may require some action and some further exploration.
Thank you. Ted, do you want to follow?
Yeah, well, just, you know, I'm trying to figure out why I find them, you know, for one, you know, it's not going to, you know, we go out to the community and 60% of the community don't pay any attention. You know, But how about, because it's on finance, something about how much money we're spending on some of these? Like, you know, diverting waste to the landfill, and we talk about how much we spend on the landfill. You feel $9 million is enough to spend on the landfill. You'll get response then. You know, and I just, because it's budget, we don't have anything talking about money, how much. So this is just kind of fluff. And so, you know, it all comes down to tax dollars at the end of the year, how much money we're spending, and everyone's gonna go, oh, you guys spend too much, and wait, and so, I don't know, maybe I have a couple of questions on the spending.
So keep in mind, this is just one form of feedback that we're getting, and maybe I'll get Christina to address that.
Yeah, and I think that the comprehensive tool that would do all of that would be one of those, you know, participatory budget, citizen budget type tools. We have looked at them, as council knows, but the resources required to populate those tools and the information to date has been challenging for us to reach. So, you know, having this survey and then with the combination of the online budget information will hopefully provide a bridge. But there are tools that could do both, but they are they're prohibitive to us at this point in terms of our resources and able to populate them.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add to that, Ted, is also, we're just talking about strategy number 1, which is about the education and awareness piece, and then strategy 2 is those boards in municipal buildings and online. And Christina was talking about, that's where the money will show up, the budgeted amount, and also doing it by theme so that people can see where we're investing larger amounts versus lower. So this is just the first piece around awareness and education. Doug and Susan?
Yeah, yeah, and I think we want to keep this relatively simple. I mean, I agree with some of the Councillor Pyre's points, and I had comments along those lines for the general package, but I think we're focusing on this right now.
We are just focused on the question.
Yeah, so the only other comment I would make about this, I'll repeat what I said at the start, is I look at more of these questions, 16, 17, 15, for example. I think it's really important to start people off on the right track with this survey and point out what is municipal responsibility versus provincial or health or something like that. So I think that's important, otherwise we're going to get a lot of answers that really won't be helpful there. But the other thing is, you know, generally you talked about themes, and I think we want to touch on those themes in the survey. So I think we'd want to look at the themes that we might settle on, if there's 5 or 6, and maybe focus some of the questions around those themes and make sure we've covered off those themes. And I say that without looking at them and matching them, but just as a general approach, here are the main things we're talking about. How do you think we're doing in this? And sort of tailor the questions that way.
So if I may, through the chair, perhaps we can step back to those summary sheets and those themes and maybe get some feedback from council in terms of what themes you'd like to explore. I've heard the infrastructure renewal. I've heard that active transportation may not be as important in the sense that there's already so much work that is being done. I'm hearing economic development and business, affordable housing I've jotted down as well. Are there other themes that council would like us to highlight?
So we can go there. I just want to go back to Councillor Chappelle's question.
Yeah, I do think that we should link the plans in here because there are people that are interested. And I think that if you have questions and no resources that they could link to directly, like you can just say as per active transportation plan, you can either link it in that sentence. If people are interested, they can actually go to the plan. If as per, you know, any of our infrastructure plans, so that they, you know, if you're able to immediately see what it's been shown in surveys as well, if you can link the plans and know that there's an action plan, if you think there's no action plan, you're gonna write a whole lot more comments than if you know there's no action plan. So if you are able to link to a plan and maybe say, oh, well, wait, I've read the active transportation plan and I actually think that that's a good idea, is different than just giving an open-ended question. So I do think that somewhere in the survey, even at the if it's an electronic survey at the bottom of the page, say the plans are at the bottom of the page. If you want to have a look at the plans, please see wherever.
Thank you, and that's possible, isn't it, Chrissy?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good.
So if we go back to priorities, in terms of the topics to highlight, Doug, did you want to?
Yeah, the one that jumps out at me is recreation, given we're a fairly young outdoor community. And I would leave active transportation there, notwithstanding our earlier comments, because it is a significant focus. Regardless of the other work, we still spend a lot of time and money on it, and so we want to touch the community, touch in the community, and make sure that we're still on track with that.
10?
13 for me, am I well informed of the district Squamish initiatives? And, I don't know, I think that question could be asked a little simpler. I mean, I know it's, yeah, the district website to me is the most important thing, the most important tool we have to get out there for the community. I mean, I think it would be great if everybody had a little button on their computer that went straight to the district and started using that for weather and, everything. So, I mean, this kind of question is one that I think a lot of people would just read over and go, oh, yeah or no, not really give it a ton of thought. And I think that I fill out a lot of surveys, usually do them, and you're supposed to make the questions so that someone in grade 8 would understand. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? I mean, make it really simple so that, because, but I think that one's the most important to me, getting that question answered. So how can we get the message out? Because I hear all the time that people aren't, oh, I didn't know that, I didn't know this. We try so hard to get it out. Well, did you read the paper? Well, I don't read the paper.
Thanks,
So
Ted.
that one's my most important question.
And then for strategy number 2, where we're going to highlight budget themes on the boards, we've got infrastructure renewal, active transportation, policy work, recreation. Would you add anything to that list?
Well, some of them are 13 then.
The communications pieces, our website.
Yeah, website and Facebook and all the different Twitters and all those things. I mean, I go on Facebook a fair bit, getting a lot of dialogue with people, and I'm not very good at answering their questions. I mean, I can't just go onto the website and pull up all the past meetings, go, see, we did do this, and I wish it was easier to do that,
Thanks. Susan, I know you added economic development to that list. Is there anything else that grouping?
No, I'm fine there. I've got other comments, but I'll wait till we get to that point.
May I ask if council has any suggestions on an economic development question that could be included in the
Aha!
in the
Doug
survey?
has something to say on that one.
So I have 2 general comments about this. And one is to try to put somebody in this chair on the budget process. And the reality of sitting in this chair is that we have very little discretionary money. We have kind of a basic nut that makes this place work, that we really have to do. We're bound by contracts, etc. And to get people understanding that, and that really the discretionary money is a relatively small portion of that. And whether you use figures or percentages or something, and that's perhaps the conversation you can have where we spend X dollars on something, on landfills or something like that. on waste diversion, or we spend X dollars on this, so people understand the scope of some of these things. Policing, our largest single line item. The other is, I keep hearing this statistic, and I frankly don't know where it came from. I think it's a BC-wide statistic that for every dollar of services we provide to a residential unit, we get about 75 cents in taxes. And for every dollar of services we provide to a commercial or industrial unit, we get $2.25 to $2.50 in taxes back. So I think, first of all, it'd be nice to know if that was correct, because I keep spouting it off to people. But I think it would be important for people to understand that. And it's maybe kind of just touches on the budget process, but it also explains a lot of what we do year-round, focusing on the amount of commercial and industrial development that we want to see in certain places, and it kind of explains where we're going with all of that. And maybe the budget process is a good place to point that out to people. Look, you're actually not paying for what it costs us to service you in your house. This is why we're taxing businesses, and that's why we want to encourage light industrial and heavy industrial and all the rest of it. So people really understand where the dollars come from. And kind of set the framework and kind of get people's minds in that ballpark before they start approaching some of these other decisions. Economic development obviously ties into that, because if people appreciate the $2.50 in taxes for every dollar in services, that comes from economic development, and that's the reason for that focus. It's not just jobs and cutting out commuting and stuff. Taxation is a huge part of that.
Any other comments? In terms of helping Christina with the economic development question?
If the question about do I receive the amount, do I feel that I receive good value for the tax dollars that I pay annually, I think that's, it'd be good to know about whether businesses feel like they're receiving value for their tax dollar. There's a difference between residential receiving value and businesses receiving value. Businesses pay 2.7% more in taxes.
2.7 times.
Yes.
So we should.
So, yeah, I'd like to understand if the businesses actually feel like they are receiving value for their dollars. Business licensing is one thing that we really haven't still tackled. We don't know anything about our economic development. We still know little about our businesses, the makeup of our businesses, the ratio of one business sort to another business sort. We really need to have that information before we can actually make decisions on economic development. And I think businesses, our business landscape has changed a little bit, but there's a lot of businesses that have left, a lot of businesses that are coming in. Targeting new businesses maybe is, if you've opened it, have you opened up a new business, or are you opening a new business? Are you planning to open a new business? There may be an ability to integrate with Kate and actually ask questions that are needed to make better decisions during budget.
So that, RC, Ted and Doug, it begs a question about whether we actually have can we do a survey for businesses through Kate as a way for her to gather information? Because if we start adding all those questions to our general one, it sort of confuses the issue. But I wonder, through the downtown BIA and Kate's work on just connecting with businesses, whether we don't sort of explore that value for money question in a bit more detail and help her gather data. And I don't want to make a comment that we have in relation to the budget.
Maybe a second survey, those questions for businesses.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest. Maybe we want to, be interesting to know the age category of who's answering these. And then when Susan started talking about that data, what, do you commute or do you stay here? I mean, you don't want to ask too many questions like that, if you're self-employed, or would it be, have 3 squares down the bottom, yeah, I'm self-employed, I commute, I think that the demographic that answers these, there's a whole demographic of commuters out there that don't pay attention. They make enough money that it doesn't matter to them. And they just don't pay attention. They don't read the paper, and they don't watch the website, they go to work, they come home, they go for a bike ride.
So let's just stay away from broad sweeping generalizations.
Well, it'd be nice to know. It'd be nice to try and get to those people.
I've got some staff hands up, but, sorry, Christina.
So I was just going to say that generally when we build the budgets, we actually have 5 general themes. The general governments, the protective services, transportation, transit. You know, we kind of go down, and if you want to kind of get some general themes, you might be able to tie that better to some of the other great work that Christina and Nushka are putting together. That might make some of those connections you're talking about with how much do we spend here, what does that service entail, and would you want to give us some feedback on that? So maybe we can take that back as a thought process. I think this is just one tool, and ideally if we can get this tool generic enough, it is something we could do earlier in the process, which is ideal, because then our managers have some feedback as to the areas in the community that are feeling neglected or that we're not dealing with enough services. It helps guide strategic planning. So I think it is important to keep coming back to the fact that this is one of several strategies. Sometimes no news is good news when you're not hearing from your public. A lot of times they're not that concerned about things, but we are really trying to poke the bear a little bit here and find out, are there issues, are there things that would help guide council and senior management with some of those prioritizations that we're trying to do, because it is a prioritization game. And I think it's a really good point that Councillor Ray says, how do they experience that seed of having to understand the intricacies and the cross connections of when we decide to do one thing, how are we giving them something else?
Thank you for that. Linda, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think just in terms of the economic development, it sounds like council would like more information than just what a budget survey would allow. I feel like the discussion's getting into the broader economic development statistics and strategy, which Kate has a lot of. So we can meet with Kate and talk about how to mesh those and get more information as it relates specifically to budget.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Councillor Chappelle's point is that sometimes, I think what she's saying is our businesses feel neglected in the budgeting process. And so if they had a short survey that was just specific to the value for money they feel around how we budget for them.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us want to get in front of Kate's strategy,
No.
but could she use this as an opportunity to get more information and also to make sure that our business community feels that we are listening to them in terms of how we're allotting that dollars. So I think that's kind of the general message.
Yeah, so what I've heard then is just working with Kate to come up with, that seems to be the gap with the economic development, is going back out to businesses and asking if they feel they're getting value for money with the taxation. Do that.
So I think my only thing with that is perhaps we can structure this to ask the question as to whether they're answering the survey as a resident or as a business owner or something along that line, to indicate that we are intending the strategy to be for everybody. Taxation is a very global revenue source, and I don't think we really want to get down to the level of, do you get what you pay for, do you get what you pay for? There have been a lot of court cases on that very discussion, and reality is it is taxation, it's for the broader community good. And that's where I get a little bit hesitant to start getting so detailed into which taxpayer. But I think it helps put some tone on this, that we're not just trying to get the residents to answer these surveys. We do want business owners, we do want the industry owners to answer these questions too. And perhaps that might help frame that.
I still have Doug on the list, but I'm just going to go to Susan because I think it's on the topic.
Thanks, and I totally agree with that you need a general broad survey, but in the past, and right now, we've hired an economic development officer who's doing a great job, but it's generally not in front of our business owners. So we haven't collected any information on business owners, and this is an opportunity to figure out when you do have a multiplier, that businesses generally know really well that they're being taxed differently than residences. You want to know that there's services that equal that multiplier. So you want to ask those questions. Are you receiving the services that you are paying for? Signage, business licensing, that all those services are adequate, and the only time that you can generally do that is during budget time. So I think it's a good time to be able to collect, and not necessarily these are general questions for, accessing your community and accessing community resources for children, that your business owners are also your residences, so those questions are important. But it is also, in an economic development environment, really important to gather and to make sure that you're addressing those business statistics. And I don't know if we've had any information since the business retention expansion plan go out to business owners. So it'd be really interesting. We have the 7 years in a business landscape. It's 5 years probably since the business retention expansion plan, where we collected data. It's completely and entirely different new business landscape. And I'd say the majority of our business licensing is in that bubble of housing growth. So at budget time, I want to know that we're addressing the bubble that is economic development, that is the expansion of our business licensing, people having to get business licenses, separating that information out during a budget time so that we know where to put resources. Maybe we don't need resources. Maybe there's new startup businesses that actually need business resources, like are the changing landscape of the business park, I'd say, is a perfect example of that, where it's becoming more of a Granville Island type area and maybe needs different aspects of policy and resources to go into that. And I think that, as we see more restaurants and other things opening in there, what does that look like for the future for economic development? Where do our resources go in budgeting in order to address that? So it is going to impact our budget. So, and maybe not a lot, and maybe a survey actually covers it, and that we get the information that we need from a survey on policy resources, because we need staffing resources and we have to allocate for that adequately. Otherwise, we end up focusing on all these other aspects and not adequately budgeting, and then every time we have an economic development question, it ends up not being budgeted for us. So I want to make sure that I have the information and other councillors have the information that they need to recognize the difference in allocation of budget, of setting the tone for a business environment, which is this, and what it's actually like to operate in that business environment.
So, because I want to move on, I think what I've heard is there's some nervousness about separating it out completely. But there is a way to structure surveys so that you can say, are you answering this as a resident or as a business owner? And so that if you check in with Kate, there might be 1 or 2 questions that if you say I'm a local business owner in Squamish, we're getting a little bit more data so that we're not, so people are generally filling out the general survey, but you might get an extra question or 2 if you're a business owner. And then Kate will come forward in the budget process with her asks for the budget this year around broader, where she's going with her economic development strategy. And I think that's a great time for us to ask questions about, do we have all the data we need, and what's the policy work that's coming up and all that. Does that help? All right. Doug, back
Thank
to
you.
you finally.
So, sitting here waiting, more things get added to my list. So the first was in the themes. I was just noticing, it just occurred to me, and somebody might have mentioned it, is we don't have the word parks in there. And we talk about, in this, we talk about indoor and outdoor recreation. We might want to throw the word park in there somewhere, whether we put it in that question or another question. And I know that complicates things because it comes out of 2 different departments for us, but I don't know that people, I think we want to know if people differentiate them, and because we spend them out of different areas. The second is, I think it would be a good idea to have a survey that is more specific to businesses, and whether you use an adaptation of this, or whether you have a different one, or whether Kate's doing it. But I think, this is a communication piece, and so we are not just seeking information, we are also giving information. I think it's an opportunity for that. And I think there's a common misconception that our business taxes are way out of line. And I think what we should point out is that the ratio of 2.7, and staff can give us exact numbers, is actually the BC average for the ratio of commercial to residential. And our light industrial, which I'm going by memory, I think was something like 3.5, was also very close to, if not right on, the BC average. And those two classes, I think, would account for almost all of the employment in Squamish. Heavy industrial is just the port and maybe wood fiber in the future, but that'll be a separate class and it's a separate deal. So I don't think we have to get too concerned about that. So I think those two, and the reason I say that is a lot of people come from the Lower Mainland or work in the Lower Mainland, or they read Lower Mainland media, which talks about the high taxes in Vancouver for commercial, which used to be up around 6 times residential, and I think it's been edging down to somewhere around 4.5 times residential. So it's a significant different balance down there than it is up here, which to me is a good news story. It's right on the BC average. And I think, so when we're asking businesses, what value do they think we get for the tax dollar, I think it's important to kind of let them know. And by the way, this is not Vancouver. We're right on the BC average here. It's always going to be higher than residential. I mean, I think that's just a fact of living in Canada, but we don't want it obviously out of whack. So I think there's a communication piece in there. And whether, I'm not going to prescribe how you actually approach this, whether it's a survey, separate survey of Kate's, or whether it's an adaptation of this, or what. But I think it would be important to go after the businesses on business taxation issues and business budget issues. That's an important sector.
Okay, I know we have a few more things to talk about. So let's keep going.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. Great discussion. Just one last thing to talk about. We wanted to bring back to Council a concept. There's been a lot of talk about participatory budgeting and how we might accomplish this in a number of different ways. An example was provided to us by Mayor Heinzman that was run in New York City. I like to aim high. But we've taken a look at it, and with the tools that we have through our GIS system, through Esri, we actually have a tool that we could roll out that's very similar. So the concept is that council would set a budget amount and the community would be invited to propose projects within that budget amount. Now, New York City's example was $1 million. However, City of Victoria is doing something with 50,000, so there's maybe some range in there. I'll take you to the tool in a second, but the concept is that you add a point to a map to describe a project that you'd like to see in your community. Other citizens like and show support for those projects. The projects that end up with the most likes surface to the top, and we do some feasibility review on it. And then that short list would go back out to the community for voting. So this is just an example. This budget example here is in Chicago. This is kind of the out-of-the-box example. Just click through here. Oh, I'm not up. Okay, how do I get up? Let's see here. Let's try to go live here. So I'm going to zoom in on Chicago here, and you'll see on the right-hand side that Lindsay, Sammy, and Scott have proposed projects for the Chicago area. So, bear with me a second, I'll just zoom in so you can see. So here you have a map of the area, and any resident can click on the Submit an Idea button down here.
Can we see their ideas?
Yep, you can. So I'm going to add an idea into Burlington Park right here. What is my project? My project idea is, we use Dan Griffin's, it was free ice cream in the park.
How about a Squamish tourism information?
So that people could stay cool in the summer. There are categories for your idea. This one would be parks and recreation, perhaps. And then it requires some personal information to which we can customize. And then you can add an attachment, and then I would report it in. So then my idea pops up there. So then the community, Lindsay Fox has talked about a streets and sidewalks project idea to improve crosswalks and signals on Jackson Avenue so that people could safely cross the street and enter Centennial Park. Sammy has created a Parks and Recreation project to improve path lights in Riverwalk Park so that people could safely exercise in the park after dusk. And Scott Smith has added a Parks and Rec project idea for new landscaping and benches so that people can enjoy time by the river. So the community has an opportunity to review these, either add their own idea or review the others that have been proposed. For example, if you like Sammy's idea, you can like it by clicking on the little heart. It's hard to see here, but, and then you can even add a comment. I added a comment here that said Riverwalk Park is in dire need of safety improvements, so supporting Sammy's idea. So at the end of the day, at the end of the period, you would have a list of the number of likes that each project receives. We could determine whether we take the top 3, top 5, run it through some feasibility review in terms of its feasibility, and then take that short list back out to the community for a priority voting exercise. So that's the concept. We wanted to bring this forward to council as an idea. We don't need a decision on this today, but we wanted to bring this back for your thoughts and perhaps input. Obviously, we can customize it. It would be a Squamish map, of course. We can we can customize it in terms of categories you may wish to create. We feel that there would be, depending on the budget amount, we might want to provide some examples as to what that amount of money would buy you, so that we don't frustrate the community by having them propose things that are not in scale with the amount that's available. There's quite a few different ways to customize it, and it could be a fun way to give the community some opportunity to have control over a certain part of the budget, and also gather further feedback on priority setting as well.
I've got Ted and then Doug.
I think that's a great idea, be water park.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, when we send out this questionnaire, why don't we engage all the nonprofits and all the seniors boards and get the question out to the boards so that the board can ask their directors. Like when we send it out, send it to the Trail Society, send it and infiltrate their table where they all sit around so that they can actually sit there and fill it out.
Thanks, Ted. Doug.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I think the challenge, two things. First of all, I think we need disclaimers saying, the one that gets the most vote isn't necessarily going to succeed because there's feasibility, etc. And the second thing is the challenge would be putting enough money aside to make it meaningful, because if you look at Victoria at 50,000, and we're maybe 10% of the size of Victoria, so that means 5,000, it's not really going to pique a lot of people's interest. So I think I'm just going to pull a number off the top of my head, I think we're probably talking about a minimum of $25,000 to make this kind of a meaningful project. So that will be one of the things we'll have to kind of decide next spring or maybe this year, is whether we can afford something like that. But I think it's kind of the next subject, actually, what types of things we want to talk about. But I think that may be one of the challenges, is getting to a point where it's actually meaningful.
Thanks, Doug. Susan?
I think $25,000 doesn't even buy us a swing set. I don't think we can, I'm not sure how much, I'd like to see a meaningful amount of money for a good project. And instead of us sitting around, this would be a great way for me to look at discretionary projects like water parks or other things, and, you know, and know whether to fund them or not. So I think that we can look at our project list and actually put some money into projects that are already, like, that may be discretionary projects, and actually ask the community instead of saying, you know, these are our projects, what are the community's projects? You know, whether it be parks and recs, or, I like opening it up to all ideas, and I think a meaningful amount of money would be, I think 50,000 is actually an adequate amount of money for you know, for any project, since you can't even buy a swing set for 25. It's like 35 to buy a nice play park. 50 might actually add some meaning to it, and I think the community, if we don't put the right amount of money, they're gonna participate and then not get any action out of it. If we put too low amount of, you know, like if we put too much money, then it's gonna set expectations really high, but I think 50 is the right amount of money to put in.
So I'll just, with the last word, I like this method of doing it. It's really cool. I agree with my colleagues. Unless we can put a meaningful number in there, it's not going to be ideal. That being said, if we did our own discretionary projects this way and asked people to vote on them, that's not a bad way to get more budget input. And maybe if we bring it back, is to have examples from staff on, if it was $25,000, what would that buy? If it was $50,000, what could that buy? And then maybe we can make a decision on just whether it's truly worth it at this point. Can we afford to go this way? But I think this takes advantage of our GIS system, which is awesome, and it's a great way to do it. So.
If I may just touch on one further point with regards to timing. I could try and pull up my PowerPoint slide again, but that may, oh, there it is. So certainly a decision isn't needed on that participatory budgeting today, and as you indicate, it's a conversation that will be part of your budget deliberations. It would be fairly quick for us to turn around, and we do see some benefit in separating it out from the feedback portion of the budget for a number of different reasons. So our proposed timeline for all of these strategies would be to focus over the months of November and December on those first three in terms of the survey, the education, the materials, the feature stories. If we launched the survey at the beginning of November and left it open for a month, the goal would be to have that feedback prepared for you for that those early December meetings. And then we could look to do a participatory budgeting exercise if that was the wish in the new year. It could be separated, and it could be once you move further along.
So I think before you took that out to the community, we'd have to have an idea of how much. So we'd have to make that decision relatively soon.
Yes, so I
And
think
maybe
that
not
would be
today.
our December meeting on the general fund. That would have to be a
Okay.
decision made then.
And then we could, or later, I mean, the participatory budgeting exercise could happen at whatever point you wish, in the sense that you only need to allocate the dollar amount in the budget, and perhaps some parameters on how you wish for it to be spent. And then that exercise with the community could take place later.
But this is kind of a neat deal, and it's new, and it's the kind of thing that can kind of get a buzz going around the budget. And so I would be inclined to do it sooner rather than later, earlier on in the process, because it might just draw in curiosity about the rest of the budget as well. The rest of the budget information.
So if we talk about it as part of December, then if we decide to go ahead, then we can start communicating about it, but then launch the process. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
That's all I
Good work.
have.
Onwards. Thanks, Christina. So then, our last piece of business is the pre-budget council priorities. Yay! This is not a wish list, council. This is talking about our strategic plan. All these items are linked to our strategic plan, so these are not things that are coming out of the blue.
No, and this item, actually, I will put a disclaimer, was put on by council on the agenda, but it's a great opportunity for us as staff to come forward and do another refresher on the strategic plan items, those that are outstanding, and then have the discussion on prioritization. We've said this before, and Anushka is going to show you a slide on our carry forward projects to date, just around capacity and really delivering on what we can for council. The election is early this year. If budget is approved by end of February, was that our goal? That still cuts into, really that gives you March, April, May, June, July, 6 months, 7 months before campaigning starts. Not that that should drive what budget decisions and the strategic plan is, but talking about the reality of what happens in the community at that time of year. So that said, did you want to start with your what's carried over first? Did you have your? Okay, that's right. We'll show council where we're at currently. Yeah, it just takes a second. So you can see in 2015, we didn't have a lot of carry forward. 2016, am I reading this right? And 2017, we're close to 30%. Currently in our draft budget, we're about 44% carry forward.
44% of what projects are?
The operating, no, it's not the capital, it's operating budget. Capital, it's a little lower, it's more around 15-20% that's carried forward.
Council, I just want to put a caveat on this. We always have to be cautious at this point in the budget process because we do ask our managers to indicate any projects they think will carry forward and a rough estimate of what might carry forward. That could get tighter by year end. They could accomplish more in the fall than what this may represent. So I just want to make sure that we're not dissing our poor managers there. That they're in a process right now. We only have so much intel, and this is generally an area or time frame in the year where we don't have as many of the cost factors. So.
And if I might, and carry forward doesn't mean not started. It just means not completed. So the budget has to carry forward into next year to complete the budget.
There could be multi-year projects.
It's kind of muddy.
Okay. Doug?
Well, so this is the operating budget. So these are the things of a capital nature from the operating budget.
No, these are the special projects that are of operating nature. So generally where council spends a lot of their time, frankly, is on the strategic plan initiatives and things along that line. The capital is not included in this.
No, but I'm just trying to think of operating types of things. Like policing costs and fire costs are, it happens within the calendar year. There's no carry forward, I wouldn't think, to next year. So it's not that type of stuff. It's
The
things
special
like paving
projects.
contract, special projects.
Yeah, but again, paving would be capital.
Oh,
So this would be
okay.
things like your OCP project, right?
Oh, okay.
And your, I'm trying to think, boundary expansion project or something along that line.
I'll bring
It's
up
all operating type.
So-
Mr. Wiggum?
Thank you. Through the chair, an example of a project that is being carried forward is the stormwater management plan, which, because of the delays in wrapping up the integrated flood hazard management plan, we had to push that one back just for staff capacity. It is fully grant funded in this case, but it's a large dollar value, and so that's an example of an operating project that had to get delayed.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Ted and Susan?
Does that mean it's got to be refinanced, or is the financing carried through? It's just carried, it's already financed.
It's financed, and if we've already taxed for it, we would carry that forward to the new year.
And just a little bit on a side note, this list that is here, that list should go out with this survey. Well, I always try to describe all the things we're doing to people, poor people. And, you know, I mean, if you start with the bright colored page, and if you look at all the things we're working on, I mean, I think that would be good information for the community to know. Is that, it's hard when, you know, you've got 60% of the population who don't pay attention, and if they could read that, they
The storyboards that we'd send out generally have a list of all proposed
Yeah.
special operating projects and service level changes.
good. I think so.
Thanks. I'm just wondering about staff resourcing again. If we actually have the staff resources, this is a lot. I'm looking at this. Yeah, just keep, exactly my point. We have a lot of engineering work in here and a lot of, like between planning and engineering. And I definitely recognize that we've taxed engineering, and maybe Chris can speak to this. Maybe I'm offside in saying that we have way less engineering staff than we do planning staff. And we tend to pile projects like we have the active transportation plan, a lot of the bylaw rewrites, the OCP, buildings being built, real estate strategy, the wildfire protection plan, site alteration bylaws. How many engineers do we have staffed right now? Like, not many. And if we're taxing them with, I just worry about staff funding and staff resources. And if we're going to have adequate resources to actually complete the plans. Because we look at all those things and we forget that it is people implementing those things. So, or consultants, and we have to fund consultants if we don't have the resources. And then our staff has to manage, it's not empty, our staff has to manage those consultants. So it's not like we give it to consultants and our staff doesn't have to work on it. So I just want to know that staff is being adequately resourced through this budget and that we don't go and add work that can't be completed or is unrealistic to complete without adding resources. And we can do that, but then we have to be very clear if we need to add more staff. We need to do that.
So maybe in answering Councillor Chappelle's question, you could also sort of tell the story about what does that carry forward number mean? I mean, 3 years ago when we started, it was 5%, and now towards the end of our term, it's 44%. So that trend doesn't seem entirely positive, and I take the caveats that we were given, but still, 5% to 44%, there's a story in there, and I would certainly like to hear, what do we take from those numbers? Are we're doing too much? Are we just doing too many big projects? And so they're all carrying over because we're doing OCPs and integrated flood hazard management plans, so that's normal. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, should we be concerned by that number? Or should we make changes in how we budget this year because of that number? So maybe in responding to those two questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I appreciate Christine talking about the caveats because we haven't hit the end of the year yet. That said, trying to get from 44 to 5 is unrealistic. It's maybe we'll get to 30, ideally 25. The story behind it, and at this point it's mostly anecdotal with the exception of the carry forward numbers, but the story behind it is it's multi-layered. So one is a very ambitious council in terms of new and amazing policies. So active transportation plan, I think you've seen the impact you've had on the community with that. We are leading edge with our master plans in terms of engineering. When you go to conferences like UBCM and others, we see that, which is amazing, especially given the community we're living in. Then there's the development pressure. So getting those master plans done in advance is really quite important. A new OCP, which the scope grew. The development pressure on the community has been incredible. So, and that started around 2015. And so we have a staff that are resourced to do a lot of ambitious projects, and then development comes in. And we are not resourced to do both. and that's where we've been falling behind over the last couple of years. It's difficult for staff to prioritize in the middle of a term and in the middle of a strategic plan, development timelines versus ambitious projects, all of that on top of the 80% that we do day to day to keep municipal services running. It's a difficult conversation to have with council because we don't want to sound overly defensive, and that is very challenging for us to do. I don't think, though, that anyone at this table, and I like council's feedback, but it's a bit of a loaded question, I don't think that anyone believes that staff are not working full tilt. In fact, I can tell you that they're not. My biggest concern is staff burnout and keeping people happy and productive and healthy. We do want to see council succeed with this strategic plan. Ideally, what that would look like is choosing a few key initiatives that council wants done by September of 2018 and making sure they get complete. Or, and I don't recommend this, resource up so we can both handle the development, handle the policy, handle the increasing services that are coming as a community grows, but we don't have anywhere to put anybody. So that means more ACCO trailers, more staff, more managers to handle the staff, more contractors, more staff to handle the contractors. Ramping up for that to complete everything in the strategic plan that isn't yet underway is really ambitious, and I'm not sure that that's the avenue that, I know it's not the avenue I would recommend, but it's not impossible. This list is everything that's currently underway. What we haven't done is indicated which ones will be carried forward. That will come out more in the budget. What isn't yet underway are all these. And in fact, the scope of these aren't crazy. I should probably take out the fill so you can see them. But that said, when we talked to our managers, we said budget very, very conservatively, nothing outside the strategic plan. That said, there are things that float up that are risk related, safety related, operationally a priority. And as the general management team, we are working to balance that against council's strategic plan. Without the context of all of it, I think it's difficult for council to choose and look at your priorities. That said, if there's anything today you can provide feedback on, or if you just want this list as a reminder as we bring the budget workshops forward for you.
Thank you. Can I see the number?
Yeah, I was, when we got to the wish list, that you don't like to call a wish list.
It's not a wish list.
I was going to raise personnel, but just in the most general way. This is an open meeting. And so I was going to suggest, and I'll suggest now, that we actually have a closed discussion about some of these things, because I'm not thinking about individuals, but I am thinking about personnel issues, and we might want to have that, and also resources, facilities, for example, which could involve acquisitions, and just to manage the general growth and the ambitions of council and all of the other pressures that we feel. And so I make that suggestion relatively soon, if not this meeting, I mean, maybe even the end of this meeting if we had time, but make that suggestion to have a closed conversation on some of these budget issues relatively soon.
Thank you, Chair. That's a great reminder coming out of the Auditor General's audit. That's the word, right?
Auditor General.
Local government, thank you, AGLG. I was thinking of the acronym. Coming out of that audit, there were a lot of action items for our Human Resources Department, one of which is a workforce planning strategy, but as you can appreciate, that's quite a comprehensive piece of work. Jeff Sim and his team will be working on that now and into 2018, so unfortunately it won't be time to inform this budget, but nonetheless, that's the lens we're looking at, as an overall corporate employment strategy, because you ramp up in planning and engineering has to catch up, and then finance and HR have to catch up, and it's a difficult strategy to, it's not going to be done for this budget. We have the TTP, which is an incredible drain on our resources at a time when attracting finance personnel is challenging in terms of the market. So there are a number of different layers, and we would be happy to talk to council about that. Okay.
Thank you for that suggestion, Doug. I don't think we'll do it today because we've got 3 counselors missing and it'd be really helpful to have them all here. Susan?
Thanks, and I think this speaks to Linda, you spoke to it well, where you said, you know, development pressures on top of policy pressures. We really, as a council, have to consider slowing down with development if we don't have the plans and the policy and the future forward-looking resources to actually handle development. And that message has to come from both council and staff. So it has to be a joint message and a joint decision. I think that conversation is really important to have right now. We have every lot of land, including our green space, up for development right now. And that is not right if you don't have neighborhood plans or transportation plans in place or infrastructure development plans. So I know this is, I speak for myself, is that if you have density on every spot of land in your district, you have to look around and yes, people need places to live, and yes, we need growth, but how fast does that growth happen? Do you use up as we use up our lots, that's 100 years of building that we don't have the ability to be able to adjust for growth. So we have to either slow down our development. There's only 2 options there. You slow down your development or you're up your resources. So I think that's a really large consideration for me going into this budget, is that we have to give the message to developers that, yeah, you can buy up 10, 15 lots and expect us to immediately process your application. But if it's in a neighborhood that doesn't have a strategy to it, and that we're dropping density into neighborhoods that aren't prepared for density, it's just not right it's not right for the community. Our community's feeling those pressures as well. The traffic planning has to go along with it, and I think we've done a poor job of keeping up with traffic planning as well as densification. Those things have to go hand in hand. And the pressure that it puts on our staff and our community just to be able to accommodate development maybe is a large conversation, and it needs to happen. And it needs to happen quickly, because as we go into this budget, if we're going to continue development, I'm going to be asking for significant resources to handle that development. If we're going to be, growing the community, we're going to need significant fire resources and policing resources. And these things have to be considered in step with each other. So with ramping up our density, I think those 2 things really require an immense conversation on the resources that it puts on a 17,000 member community that really is the congestion that's going to happen, the pollution that's going to happen, the unpleasantness of densifying before you have the resources. We really need to consider that in plans, and if we don't have the plans in place, we have to slow down. And that's a hard conversation.
Is it fair to say, if you were looking ahead to this budget, you would prioritize policy work? And you wouldn't start off promoting a big ramp-up budget?
Yeah, yes,
But-
absolutely not.
But if others supported a big ramp-up budget, you would be really focused on the staff levels and making sure we have the staff to be able to handle it.
Absolutely, yeah. That ramp up, if we are going to focus on processing more development and that's going to be our focus, then we need more staff.
All right, so let's hear from others at the table. I've got Ted and then, do you just?
I was just on this point, just to leave this point about the closed meeting, can we leave it with staff then to talk to the mayor about scheduling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Ted?
Yeah, I like the idea of slowing down a bit and not piling it on so much. I don't like resourcing up. And I think it was 78, we had 6,500 units on the table, similar to what we're doing now. And
78?
78? You're going back that far?
or not 78,
08?
08.
Well, 78 must
Well, I
have
was
been a great
thinking,
year.
It was, that's the year I came here.
But we did have a whole, we had waterfront landing, and we had all these places, all going through staff, and then the bottom dropped out. And, then we gave extensions to a lot of them, and a lot of them we lost, and new ones came back. And so I worry about that a bit. I think adjustment coming. And so I wouldn't want to staff up and then have all these staff that don't have the, and so, you know, we have talked briefly about bed caps, and I remember talking about how Lister put the brakes on a little bit. But I remember, I think the mayor said if a development comes in and applies and they own the land, we don't have any mechanism to say, sorry, bud. So we have to be careful there. I like the idea of prioritizing a few things on the list, and then when one's gone, you pull the next one up. When it's gone, pull the next one up, and just be a little more reasonable about it.
You're good? Do you want to comment on just the workload or what you would prioritize in this budget? Bob?
I have my own list of, my own wish list, I'm sorry.
Your own list of items related to the strategic plan, is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
I didn't relate them to the strategic plan, frankly, I just related to the things that I thought were coming up. So, so when we get to that stage, I can list them off.
Certainly for me, I know there's caveats about that number, but I would like to see, I feel like there's a pig in the python, right? There's a huge amount of policy work that's just sort of stuck there. I mean, not stuck and the work's not getting done, but it takes a lot of energy to sort of move through that process. So I would like to see some really key policy pieces as priorities early in a year, because I'd like to get them, you know, the OCP needs to be approved. I know that's already budgeted for, we're going to get it done, but if it bleeds later and later into the year, it starts to become a political hot potato, and it shouldn't. It's a long-term vision. I think, to Susan's point, growth is something that people are experiencing both in positive ways and negative ways. So you hear both from the community. People are like, oh, it's great. I love that there's new people and there's new, you know, businesses, and but also people sort of saying, you know, we don't have the infrastructure yet. We need a second ice rink. So for me, it's making sure that we focus on having the right policies in place to manage growth, and that if that means, you know, some of the other work slows down. I don't think we have to accomplish everything on the strategic plan. The strategic plan is to guide your thinking, and as we know, things come up during our term that we didn't anticipate, or, you know, weren't on the list, but we had to add them because we needed to address them. So a strategic plan is about not getting everything done. It's about setting that distant sort of North Star and moving in that direction. And I think we've done that by identifying sort of the key areas that we want to focus on for our term. So you know, it's we have a lot of carryover. I'm not sure that we need to keep, you know, like adding projects. I think we should finish projects. I think that should be our focus. That said, I hear that my colleague has a list in front of him of other items that might be related to the strategic plan. So do you want to go there?
If
Or do you
I
have more
might,
to say?
Chair, one thing that we are thinking of doing if staff endorses it, or if council endorses it, sorry, is to reformat the strategic plan document going into 2018 to demonstrate so the goals that are listed under the priority areas, similar to what we did in a Word document for the council workshop, is listing under each of those goals everything that's been accomplished to achieve that goal, to demonstrate that yes, we won't get everything done, but many, if not all of those goals have been addressed. And if council endorses that, then we can start that work, and with our graphic designer wizard that we have, hopefully we can produce it quickly for you.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Karen's point that it's not an exercise in ticking things off. It is like an arrow that we're following, and I'm satisfied we're doing that. One policy piece that you know, it's part of the pig and the python, I think, for me at least, is the marine plan, which because of other things that I know are happening in the community, is becoming increasingly important, I think. And so, personally, that's on my list.
Through the chair.
Maybe a segue to this slide?
Well, yes, we have actually just awarded the RFP to an organization to complete the Marine Strategy Phase 2.
Yay! There's been a sound rejoicing there. Okay.
This slide, through the chair, is a listing of our more substantial policy and bylaw projects that are listed in the budget. I also have a list of...
When you say budget limit, do you mean in our current 5-year or anticipated to be proposed for next year?
And
Combination.
in addition, we have all kinds of policy work on an operational level. I have a list if council wants to hear some of them, but that we generally do year over year, whether it's upkeep of policies, modernizing policies. We have a First Nation consultation policy that we're working on that's brand new within current budget. But these are the more substantial budget, heavy policy and bylaw. So you'll see these come out in our budget request or proposal.
The debris flow, that's just not the mapping, but the development control policy, is that correct? And where are we at with that? Because it's been mapped quite a bazillion times.
I'll defer to the expert in the room.
That is both mapping and development control policy. It has been mapped a few times. We really have two mapping efforts at this point. They're out in the world. One, the authors of that mapping effort from a few years ago now have declared it obsolete. Too much new information has come out, and they are comfortable with that mapping. The most recent mapping that we have isn't complete yet, and is stamped as draft. So really, for anybody who is working on development in that area, they're really working with draft information and complete information. And so people are in a tough spot. It's been very difficult for the district to really give any sort of guidance on what we're doing, including at the airport and other places. So we had been hoping that through the GI development, that final hazard mapping, that it would be finalized. And so at this point, the GI development is sort of an unknown timeline. And I think we need to have a discussion. This dollar volume in here is a discussion around if we don't have an external development come in and do this mapping for us, then we're in a tough place for development in that area. We probably would do it as a district, and how would we fund that, and what would that look like?
Follow-up? Yes, follow-up. Thank you, that's excellent information. I thought it was a pretty well-studied debris flow, but that's, I agree when you want to add development to an area. And, you know, I think that this, especially with the sloughing the other day, and that it's overdue, this, for me, like the safety of our community, if we're continuing to develop in an estuary, in a debris flow, in 52 and 54 natural hazards, we really have to consider safety in our community. And before Doug gets into his projects, I just like to state that developing in natural hazards comes with expenses, and or we can look at moving development of housing into a different area. And I think when we look globally nowadays, you can see the impact that developing in flood hazard area and debris hazard areas has, and either this is a huge funding effort as well, and I think understanding density in these areas, because the pressure of development in easy areas right now where you have infrastructure is going to butt up against moving your community to where there are less hazards, which is up. So I think that is something that as we go into this budget, that it can't be just ignored because it's so large. it really, we have to be respectful of the fact that this debris flow is a real thing, and that if we're not going to put in, have a developer pay for it, we have to figure out another way around it, or we have to look at moving housing into a different area. And on that note.
Oh, so, forgive me, but I approached this, when I saw the agenda item, I approached this similar to the way we did in the Finance Committee when I was chairing it. We went around the table and we just asked everybody to kind of put out things that they wanted to discuss in the budget, to give staff time to kind of suss them out and figure out if they're real or not. And so I do have a list of those, and one of them is something you've never heard of, and it's a contribution to the Ocean Watch Task Force. It's the thing that Council will recall I was appointed to. And what we're doing is putting together a reference guide for Howe Sound. It's going to be primarily funded from NGOs, but the local government portion of that in total will be $20,000 a year for 3 years. Squamish's share of that, because this is all the local governments in Howe Sound, will be just a fraction of that. But for budget purposes, I think the starting discussion will be, say, $10,000 a year for 3 years. And whether that goes out as a grant or whether that is some other line item in the budget, I'll leave to staff, but just as a number so you're aware of that. By the time we get to budget, I'll probably have a closer figure, but at the moment that's a safe number.
So let's look through the House Sound Forum, and we should be getting an update on that this Friday.
You will, actually, that's right.
Keep
Yep.
going.
Second is police and fire, and I saw in minutes of the meeting I missed that the fire department expects to come forward with a request for a person. But we've also had this discussion before about our policing numbers and expected growth rates and so forth, and where we expect to be in 2030 and so forth. And we kind of started on an every other year, possibly adding a member. And if we carried on with that, this would be one of the years. So I'll just leave staff to think about that. We're adding fire person. Do we add a police person the same year? Do we try and split them off? But just to carry on with that program, so we don't have to, add 8 people in 1 year to kind of catch up. Third thing, and I'll speak very, very briefly about it, is, and this is a capital item, is dikes and the issues around a couple of our dike priorities. And I won't say anything more about it, but to have a plan for that for 2018. The last thing was neighborhood plans. We had a discussion about this at one of our, it was a rezoning, about the idea of preempting or us initiating neighborhood plans for existing neighborhoods. And I'll leave it to staff to think about which neighborhood and what form the plan might take, but we kicked out the idea of Denville North Yards, Estates, possibly Brackendale, sort of existing neighborhoods, as opposed to a plan for a new sub-area that at the moment is just forest. So whether we want to get on a program of doing that one a year or one every other year, but to initiate that, and I have no idea what the cost. So it's a budget discussion. The final thing, my favorite topic, is surplus. So we had a discussion.
Christine knew this was coming.
We had a discussion about surpluses, and staff brought up the point that a lot of our fund for contributed surplus is accounted for in the sense that we use it for bridge financing, contingencies, etc. And fair enough, and I don't think there was any debate about that. But I got the impression from that there was still some money that might be left over that we could think about applying to other things. And so without making any decisions on that today, I think it would be helpful if staff had some idea of what we want to keep the minimum level of our surpluses at, and then what might be available to offset some other funding. Because we've already taxed for this money, if it avoids borrowing or taxation of some kind, then
what it might be used for. And I take the point, and we all agree it was not the kind of thing that would go into the operating fund, but it might offset a capital expense somewhere, a one-off expense. So just to have that information available for us to make those decisions.
Thank you. Anything, Ted? Susan?
Active transportation, if we're going through a list, I have the two. I'm still interested in how we can just focus our resourcing along Government Road. Again, we're building economy. I want active transportation on one flat lit road between here, in between downtown and the industrial park and the other areas of town. As we are, I remember, as Councillor Blackman-Wolf said, you know, as we're building these denser developments, we're going to lose the multiple driveways into one driveway, and it makes it easier to separate out, and as well the width. And I know there's a lot of challenges, but we tend to pick little projects like build a sidewalk at the end of nowhere, build a building. I really think that focusing our active transportation money on helping economy and helping people get, you know, like right now, because we've put a lot of gyms and the trampoline and the climbing gyms, the kids that are traveling from Brackendale into the business, like that has become the center where community is coming to for drinking, for gyms, for a lot of different aspects, and employment. So being able to move safely between the two, between our economic centers is really an important active transportation route for me. And I know my kids, I think about my kids and how many times they're going into the business park now, which I never expected them to be doing tons of lessons in that area, but they go by themselves along Government Road, and every morning when I'm traveling that road, whether it be by bike or automobile, I see tons of kids getting to school along that route. All our kids' schools are along that route, so I'd like to focus our active transportation on resolving some of those conflicts in that area. I think that's pretty much the only change in priorities. I think the staff is pretty much, as well as the real estate. Having the real estate strategy, I've been looking forward to that, and knowing what we're going to do with Brendan Park. And integrating with the school board, like moving the school where they actually do their multiples of, they have the mountain bike, the soccer, hockey, they're busing their kids to Brendan Park. Would it be something that we could combine, moving the school, moving the high school to Brendan Park so they aren't busing their kids every day, and then open up economic development land in our downtown? Makes a lot of sense. And that conversation hasn't really, it gets thrown out and then doesn't really go anywhere, but as well adding density to Brendan. We've already added density. It wouldn't have been the first place that I thought about, but since we've already added a ton of density to Brendan Park, that may be a place that we can look at a P3 project with adding density to Brendan Park to pay for, and having the lease space for the school, and more resources in the bottom for our community instead of having it be built on a pile of logs. And yeah, so those are the, and I think that's all in one. The real estate strategy in Brendan Park is all in one, and then active transportation budgeting. Not adding to it, but just resourcing exactly what we have.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't have anything to add to the list. I think we should finish what we started. And I'd certainly support the direction that Councillor Reese was going in with neighbourhood planning. That was related to our growth management conversation in terms of, you know, neighbourhood plans as precursors before we open up new massive tracts of land. And I think that's important. And, you know, one of the things that, as the OCP finishes, is how we deploy our planning staff. And one of the things, because we have a children's charter, we have a food policy council now, we have an active transportation plan, we know that childcare is still a major issue in our community, is is whether we can put someone's time onto the social planning part of our community. And so that's not adding resources, but is thinking about, our whole healthy communities measures. Our EDI stats have been going in the wrong direction, and it can't just be about building buildings anymore. We have to build a community that's healthy and vibrant, and it'd be great. I know we've now got engineers with a lens on active transportation, and not necessarily always making it easiest for cars, but making it easier for pedestrians and cycling. And I would certainly love to see some of our planning attention on the community connectedness and those things that we approved as a council in terms of our charters to make this a healthy, vibrant community. But I think my emphasis on this budget is not adding lots, but just finishing the good work that we've started. Any other final comments from staff or council?
No, well, yes, Chair. I
Okay.
will say no. No, I'm not going to say anything and then talk. That's very, very helpful for us in terms of getting started with our own prioritization with the budget based on what council has said, the list, and we're actually debriefing this afternoon and we'll get started.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Those are some great conversations today. Appreciate everyone's input and thoughtfulness. There are no recommendations to council or referrals from council. All of the finance and audit committee meetings are now becoming committee of the wholes to do budget. So if there are things that you want to discuss, those should go to the mayor, who should be chairing the committee of the whole budget meetings. But if there's anything else that you'd like to see on the finance and audit when it comes back in, I don't know, March, if I'm still chairing that committee, let me know. Any debrief, roundtable discussion, thoughts? Seeing none, motion adjourned. Moved by Doug, seconded by Susan, all in favor, opposed, motion carries.